Have you ever thought to yourself, man, I really like Starfield, but I wish I could turn this into Star Wars? Well, look no further, cause now you can, and it's called Star Wars Genesis. This is not a little collection of mods slapped together that makes your game look like Star Wars but doesn't feel like it. Where you might see a couple stormtroopers, maybe see a Mandalorian, but overall the game is still obviously Starfield, right? It still feels, sounds, and plays like Starfield, it just has this different collection of flavor mods. That is not the case. Although this is a ongoing project, it really does feel like you're playing a Star Wars game, down to the way it sounds. Every little thing feels and sounds like Star Wars, even things that I really wouldn't expect. The characters actually refer to things as if they were Star Wars locations or Star Wars factions, like they don't refer to the Freestar Collective as that, they call it the Rebel Alliance. The Crimson Fleet is not really the Crimson Fleet, it's the Shadow Collective, and they refer to it as that throughout the game. Or say for example the UC or New Atlantis, it's actually the Empire or it's Coruscant, so they actually use the terms from Star Wars. It's just so much effort and detail goes into this. Also worth mentioning, the author of this overhaul is called Deity Venji, and he does have a YouTube channel here as well, and he is a really helpful, nice guy. I don't even know the guy, and I was sending him messages at like 3 in the morning asking him for help with this or that, or how does this work, or how does that work, and he was responding to my questions and everybody else's. He's clearly not only very dedicated to his project, but he's also very nice and helpful. You can tell he just has an insane amount of love for this project because even the smallest details that you wouldn't expect anybody to change it, he makes it look like Star Wars, the smallest details. Now let's go ahead and talk about gameplay changes because it does change a lot, especially when it comes to the combat. It's very different from the vanilla. Out of any overhaul or any mod list that I have ever played for this game, this is truly the one that makes the combat feel the most different from the original. In short, it makes the combat really dangerous, like extremely lethal. And it does tie in kind of with how Star Wars works in that aspect. Generally speaking, unless you're a droideka or a super battle droid or you're wearing Mandalorian armor, one shot or two will usually kill you regardless of armor. So it's the same idea here and feel. Normally when you get shot once or twice, you're gonna die, and the combat is very difficult as a result. That is when I feel like this overhaul in the game is at its best, early on. Because honestly, as you progress, the game starts feeling more like a sandbox as opposed to an RPG. And it is my understanding that that is exactly what it's supposed to be. It's supposed to be a sandbox, not the traditional vanilla experience. I'm gonna go ahead and just really quick wrap up the explanation of the overhaul first, and then we'll get into how I actually feel, what was my impression of the progression and, replay value and all that. Because while Star Wars Genesis is very cool, and it deserves all the acolytes and props that it's getting because it's just phenomenal, it's not really for me. At least later on in the game, and we're going to talk about that because it starts very strong, and towards the mid game is where it starts losing me, but we'll get into that. So what else does it do? Well, it reworks the aesthetic aspect of just about every single little thing in the game. Everything from almost every single NPC in the game, every single weapon, every single location, everything is Star Wars. So if you like Star Wars, you're gonna geek out because obviously the guy that made this is a big fan. All the weapons, or at least most of them, are directly out of the Star Wars universe, and they really sound and feel like them. All the clothing, all the armor, all of the locations, the fauna, the animals, everything feels like it's straight out of Star Wars. There's truly nothing like it out there so far. I've played many mods, many lists, many collections that kinda try to do this, and they don't really even come close. So major props to the guy that made this. He clearly has a lot of passion. Now, I'm gonna tell you, as far as the gameplay, what I personally don't like, which you might disagree and you might like it. I am very hesitant to say anything negative about this because, for one, it's completely free, so if you don't like it, just don't play it type of thing. Second, this clearly feels like somebody's life's work, which is obviously not because Starfield is not that old, but at least since it's come out, or at least since they've been working on this, you can tell they've poured everything into it. There's so much passion and such an insane level of attention to detail here that, who am I to criticize it? I really couldn't do better. So I feel really bad saying anything negative about it. And it's not even negative, it's just stuff that I personally don't like or wasn't to my taste. I always try my best to just be super honest because downloading this stuff is kind of a project and kind of an investment. You do need Nexus Premium because it's a lot of mods. You do need to put some time into this because you're going to have to finagle with things that might not be working, or if you want to upgrade to HD. There's a certain amount of memory that you have to designate as available to run Starfield with this to be able to run it properly. So I try to be honest about these things because before you spend an afternoon trying to download all this stuff and figure out how it works and going through the effort, I want you to know what you're getting into. Because I don't want you to feel like you just wasted your time and money installing all of this stuff, paying for Nexus Premium, going through all of this, and then you find out you don't like it. So I'm gonna be honest, even if it does make me sound like a ungrateful child or something. So let's just go ahead and start with how I feel about the gameplay and the progression. The early game combat is where I think this really shines. Early on in the game, when you're just getting started, when you don't have really strong gear just yet, and you haven't played for too many hours, it's really good. It's super dangerous, super lethal, really hard, and really fun. The problem that I really felt is with the progression, because again, this really is meant to be a sandbox. It doesn't really feel like a game that you're progressing. There's a point where you start really leaning into power fantasy. And if I'm being honest, because of that, I really didn't even feel like finishing my playthrough because I just got to this point where I was just too strong and overpowering everything. Now granted, you can delay this a little bit by tweaking the modifiers, right? You can make the enemies deal more damage even though you've leveled up, and you can make it so you deal less damage, so you can finagle with that for a while. But even then, even if you make some of those adjustments, at least for me, I came to this point where I just felt like I was overpowering everything. The other problem, and I've talked about this on this channel before, is that when you make the combat this lethal, you kind of trivialize weapons in general. There's a ton of different Star Wars weapons in this game, but when it comes down to it, everything kind of feels the same. The only reason why at any given point I had so many weapons in my inventory, it's just to not run out of ammunition. It was just because, different weapons fire different types of ammunition that you will find. So it wasn't so much that I have different weapons for different situations. In some cases, 2 or 3 of them, it was exactly that. But generally speaking, it's just so I had something to shoot in general. And some of them do play different than others. Sure, some of them have a scope, so they feel like a sniper. Some of them are a rapid fire pistol, or others have slower fire rates, so they feel more like a semi-automatic weapon. Others feel like you're using a machine gun, so there is some variety. It's not like there's no variety. But generally speaking, a problem that you have when you make the combat so lethal is that it doesn't even matter what you're shooting. Everything will kill. So then the weapons end up becoming more of a roleplay thing, like what would my Mandalorian bounty hunter character use? Well, probably this pistol, so I'm using it for the roleplay, not because it's useful. Or I don't know, what would a clone commando use? Oh, this blaster rifle or whatever. Okay, so that's what I'm gonna use for the roleplay. They don't feel that different. The other issue that kind of ties into this is more cosmetic in nature, and it's not the author's fault, because the weapons in the game are from Star Wars, and they look exactly like it. So in that sense, he did a great job. So what's the problem with that? Well, if you're a huge Star Wars fan, none. If you really like the weapons in Star Wars, there is no problem. It's my personal preference. I absolutely love Star Wars, and I completely understand why the weapons in the game are going to be Star Wars weapons because, that's the overhaul, that's the vision, it makes sense. However, unfortunately, the weapons in Star Wars are really bland. That's just my personal opinion, but they kind of all look the same. Generally speaking, anywhere between 80 to 90% of all the weapons that I'm using just feels like I'm running around shooting lasers out of a pipe. That's what it feels like. They're so bland. I don't like the weapons from Star Wars. Some people feel like, in general, the aesthetic of Starfield is very bland. Like the whole NASA punk thing, I love it, but a lot of people think it's very uninspired and bland. So the Star Wars stuff really helped give it, this distinct character, especially the look of the NPCs, the armors and everything. I think it elevates it if you don't like Starfield. Everything in Star Wars has a lot of personality. Like one of my favorite things are the super battle droids. I always thought they look really, really cool. Or the Mandalorian armors or the clone troopers. Everything looks really cool. So in that sense, if you don't like the traditional vanilla look of Starfield, you're gonna really feel like this elevates the aesthetic value of the game, for sure. And I even like it, even though I do like Starfield. It looks really cool. Literally the only thing I don't like is the look of the weapons. They feel and look very bland, which again, it's just the way Star Wars is. It's not the author's fault. And then you combine that with an extremely lethal combat where it already feels like every weapon does the same thing. Now they look and feel exactly the same, and it makes at least the combat or at least the looting feel really bland. Now on the counter end of that, where it really shines is the armors and the suits and the clothing in general. All of that looks very cool and inspired, very Star Wars. That's the cool part. The weapons, not so much. I pretty much got to this point where I just didn't see a reason to loot anymore. There's no reason to buy new weapons or collect new weapons because it all does the same, so I just stopped looting after a while. And maybe that's just personal preference, but I don't really think that that's a good thing, because what separates Starfield from something like Call of Duty is that, it's a looter shooter, it's an RPG, as opposed to just an FPS where, you're not collecting weapons. And since we're already on this subject, let's go ahead and talk about the loot. The gameplay footage that you're probably seeing is of my second playthrough because I had to start over and install Star UI or whatever it's called over this list. Because honestly, I just couldn't play with the traditional UI. There's no symbols, there's no values, it's really hard to tell what's what. In Star Wars, most of the weapons don't have distinct names, like they're not called Grendel, they're not called, Razorback or whatever. They don't have these distinct names. They're like a letter and then the number 280 or the number 120 or the number 220 or whatever. They're just like codes. So unless you're a really, really big diehard fan of Star Wars, it's really hard to even know what you're looting. And I'm a fan of Star Wars. I just don't know what every single weapon is called. So I'm individually looting every single thing, then opening my menu and checking to visually see what it is. I really couldn't play like that. So I saw someone else playing this game and I noticed that they were using Star UI. I asked them what did they disable and what did they do. So you disable the compact UI and I think the smooth 120 FPS UI. And then you can go ahead and install Star UI or Starfield UI, whatever it's called, over this list. And at least in my experience, I'm not guaranteeing anything. I don't know if it'll break your game, but for me it worked. So that's what I did and it made the looting experience way more enjoyable. On the armor side, it's a little bit easier, right? You kind of know what Mandalorian armor is. You kind of know what this or that is. You get the idea. But even then, you don't see the value, so you don't know if you should or you shouldn't loot. So what ends up happening is you're constantly micromanaging your inventory. You're opening it up to see, okay, should I keep this or should I throw it away? You have to manually open your menu to check individually each and every item. You can't just loot and decide on the spot, which kind of breaks the flow of things. And again, not all of that is the author's fault. It's not his fault that that's what the weapons are called in Star Wars. That's not his fault that that's how Bethesda made the game and, I, for example, have grown used to using Star UI or something like that. That's not his fault. None of these things are me criticizing or dogging on the author. I get why they are the way that they are. It's just personal preference. It's how I felt, whoever it is to blame. Well, if you don't like it, then make your own mod. Oh, if you can't recognize what each weapon is just by looking at the name, then the problem is you're not a true Star Wars fan and that is a you problem. Okay, whatever. I'm just telling you how I personally felt. The looting's honestly, at least for me, the most dreadful part about the overhaul. It makes it really, really not enjoyable, which kind of leads me to my next point. I would suggest you don't even loot. The reason for that is because you get rich so quick in this game that you do really need to use some self-imposed rules, for sure. Unless that's what you're into. That's the whole idea, right? It's a sandbox, so you can play however you want, but there's no traditional sense of progression unless you make it. So originally I started this game as a Mandalorian mercenary, and just right off the bat, I felt like I pretty much had everything I could possibly want. Yes, maybe there's better armor, which I'll show you, but I pretty much already felt really strong. So when I restarted, I started just as a regular civilian, and I had a better time. If you're constantly looting weapons and armor, you're gonna get rich really quick, similar to how vanilla Starfield works, which is why I've always been such a big fan of Starvival and other mods that kind of remove a lot of the loot from the game. You don't just find med packs laying around. You can't just loot off the armor off of a dead NPC or a dead enemy or whatever. You can't do that because that kind of breaks the experience and the progression. The looting in the vanilla experience really breaks the economy of the game really quick, and it's no different here. And as a matter of fact, it's enhanced. The problem is like times 10. In Star Wars Genesis, you get rich so quick and so early on in the game, you can pretty much have just about everything you want, even before finishing like the first temple. Basically, by that point, you're already made. You have everything you could possibly want, except the nicest spaceship, I guess. What I have personally done with Starfield is I played the game either with permadeath or really harsh self-imposed rules. There's many ways you can do this, it just depends on how much you want to delay the progression. But one of the things that I do is I don't loot, at least I don't loot bodies. You can't loot spacesuits, you can't loot weapons and resell them, because that breaks the economy. The other very fun way to play Starfield, if you've never tried it, I suggest you at least do it once, is playing with permadeath. If you die, the game is over. That is like the best way to play the game. Unfortunately, with this overhaul, permadeath is not going to work because at least early on, you're going to be dying a lot. The combat is not at all spongy, and if you're doing permadeath, it needs to be a little bit more spongy or a little bit more forgiving, otherwise it's just going to frustrate you. So permadeath would probably not work with this overhaul, or at least I can't see it working. Maybe you can make it work, but whatever. That's a super niche and hyper-specific thing. And you're especially going to ruin the progression if you do the Manthist hideout quest too early on. And in this case, I'm not going to spoil too much about it because there's tons of surprises. So I'll just spoil this one. It's no longer the Manthist hideout, it's the Mandalorian hideout. And this is really cool because when you finish the quest, instead of getting the Manthist armor, you're going to get both Boba Fett's armor and Mando's armor. And they look very cool. It really adds to that immersion or role play as if you're playing as Boba Fett or Jango Fett or whatever. If you're going for what I think most people that play this are going to go for, you're being a bounty hunter, yeah, you're probably going to want Boba Fett's armor. The problem though is that these are like the strongest armors in the game, or at least the ones that I came across. So then there's really no reason to loot ever again. At that point, it feels like there's nothing to work towards anymore. You have the best armor in the game. You're already the most coolest looking guy in the entire game. Why even keep playing? What you can do is you can kind of fix this with console commands. You can decide a price for these armors, and if you want to pick them up, you just add remove item, whatever the console command is, and remove that amount of credits from your inventory. That way you can still use them, or it can still be like a money sink or an attainable goal, but you're setting a price for that armor as opposed to just getting it for free. Same thing with the Razor Leaf. That's another aspect too, you know, there are Star Wars spaceships in this game. There are some that are pre-built, there are some that you can build, but generally speaking, it doesn't replace the spaceships in the game. I don't know if that's something that the author is working on, if it's ever going to happen, but as of now, it's still Starfield ships for the most part. You can, pretty early on if you want, buy a very overpowered TIE fighter or TIE bomber, whatever it's called, that is clearly Star Wars and it's a very cool looking. But if you do that, it is kind of going to break the game because it is very powerful. So again, it's more for that roleplay sandbox feel. I don't think I have a whole lot else to say other than the fact that Mos Eisley looks phenomenal. This is like my favorite part of the entire mod. This location looks freaking cool, man. Mos Eisley has been created or recreated beautifully. You're gonna notice in my gameplay footage that some of the sand and stuff like that is pink at times. I don't know why that is. Maybe it was an issue with my mod installation. Maybe it's something that they're still fixing. Maybe it's a bug, or maybe that's how it's supposed to be. I don't know, but just so you know, I did notice that. Maybe that was a me issue, but it still looks really nice. So should you try this overhaul? I think yes. If you're a Star Wars fan, even if you're not a massive one, you're probably gonna like this. You probably want to try this at least once. And really, out of all the overhauls that I've seen out there that kind of try to do the same thing, nothing comes even close to this. You're also probably going to like this if you want a very sandbox type of experience. If you're into the power fantasy stuff, if you don't really care about progression and economy and the RPG element of it, you just kind of want to, be Boba Fett or whatever, you're going to love this. If you care more about the other things that I mentioned that I care about, this might not be so much for you. You're going to get tired of it pretty quick. At first, you're probably going to like it, but it will eventually become novel not that far into the game. Regardless of my personal preferences and my nitpicking of different things here and there, this is objectively an incredible overhaul. Very, very ambitious. I haven't seen anything quite like it. I've praised other mod lists on this channel before for Starfield. We've talked about the Constellation mod pack, we've talked about Gate to the Stars. Both of those are amazing, but they don't quite do nearly as much as this does. Those collections are great, and they are in fact my preference on how to play the game, but they don't rework every little detail about the experience like this does. And for that, I think the author deserves major, major props. I've never seen anything like this. It's phenomenal. Criticisms aside, let's just go ahead and wrap up the video by thanking the mod author and acknowledging how good of a job he did and how detail-oriented he is and how beautiful this looks. If you stuck with me till the very end, as always, I thank you very much for your time. If you did in fact like this video, you felt like it was helpful, don't forget to leave me a thumbs up. And if you want to see more content like this in the future, please don't forget to subscribe. I hope you have a great weekend. Take care.